Hi everyone, welcome to the Jayda and Stitches show. It's definitely entering cozy season out there. It's kind of blustery, it's very cool. It was even raining this morning, which means it's the perfect time to make ourselves a new neck covering for the cool weather ahead. Today we are going to show you the next in our pumpkin spice set that we've been doing here on the show. This is the pumpkin spice hat. If you missed the hat, we'll make sure that you can see that link to that tutorial in the description box down below. Today we're going to make the matching cowl, or make it a scarf. I'm going to show you how to make a cowl or a scarf for a child or an adult today using the same leaning shell pattern that we used to make this hat. And I'm going to use the same yarn that I used to make the hat so that I have a matching set. And that yarn is Pound of Love by Lion Brand. And we'd like to thank Lion Brand Yarns for sponsoring today's video. Pound of Love is my new favorite soft acrylic yarn. It's a size 4, medium weight, 100% acrylic, and it's a gigantic ball of yarn, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. I like to buy my acrylic yarn in bulk because I tend to make a lot of things with the colors I like. Each Pound of Love has over 1,000 yards in it, and it's easy to toss in the washing machine. It comes in a whole bunch of different colors, and we'll link to lionbrand.com in the description box down below so you can check them out. Pumpkin Spice is the name of the color that I'm using, rather fittingly, and I just love that color because it just makes me think of all things cozy and toasty in the fall. The leaning shell stitch is an easy one to do. It's a back and forth one row repeater, and if you made the hat, you'll know how quick it is to make the scarf or the cowl. So let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch ourselves up a brand new pumpkin spice cowl or a pumpkin spice scarf together. In order to make our pumpkin spice scarves or cowls, we're using Pound of Love by Lion Brand. There's more than enough yarn in one of these giant balls of yarn to make a scarf or a cowl, plus matching hat and mitts. You're looking at over 1,000 yards per ball. This is a size 4, medium weight, 100% acrylic, nice and soft yarn. And for a scarf, you're going to want 300 yards for a child, 420 yards for an adult. For a cowl, you will want 150 yards for a child, 200 yards for an adult. So more than enough to make a couple out of one ball. You're going to want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, a stitch marker, a 5mm hook, also known as an H or an 8, and a measuring tape is a handy thing to have as well. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. Both the scarf and the cowl patterns are made working this stitch pattern back and forth. The only thing that changes is the number of foundation chain rows. If you're making a scarf for a child, you will want to chain 32. If you're making a scarf for an adult, you'll want to chain 36. This foundation chain will determine the width of your scarf. You can make your scarf over any foundation chain that is a multiple of 4. If you are making the cowl is also worked back and forth, but much longer and for a shorter number of rows, and then we are seaming it together into sort of a stovepipe look. To make a cowl for a child, you will want to begin with a foundation chain of 80. For a cowl adult, you will want to start with a foundation chain of 96. Also, your foundation chain can be any number of 4 chains, so any multiple of 4 chains, and the foundation chain affects the cowl's full length. When joined together, it needs to fit comfortably over the head, but I'll talk about that in a moment. Once again, if you're making this a scarf and you're making it for a child, you want to chain 32, and that determines the width of your scarf. For an adult scarf, chain 36, and if you want to make it wider or narrower, it's any multiple of 4 chains. That's for a scarf. For the cowl pattern, it is a much longer foundation chain because we are working a long piece that will then, when seamed up, will fit over the head. So for a child's cowl, chain 80. For an adult cowl, chain 96, or any foundation chain number that's a multiple of 4. And what you want to do, just to make sure that it's the right size, is link the two together and pull it on over your head. It should fit over your head with quite a bit of room to spare. It shouldn't be tight at all because this is going to fit around our neck eventually. So just see if those two ends and that ring fits comfortably over your head. There's a bit of stretch there. It should. Both the scarf and the cowl are made in the same fashion. We're using the same stitch pattern. It's the leaning block pattern. We work first in one direction, then we flip our work and we work in the other direction. The only difference is that the scarf is narrower and has many more rows. The cowl is a lot wider and has many fewer rows. That's the only difference in it, but the stitch pattern is the same for both patterns. This is how we begin. We skip the first chain, the first 3 chains, 1, 2, 3 from the hook, find the 4th chain and work 3 double crochets into that chain. So 3 double crochet into the 4th chain from the hook. And that is the first little leaning block. We skip 3 chains, so 1, 2, 3, find the 4th and work a single crochet into that chain, chain 3, and into the same chain 3 double crochet. So into the chain, 3 double crochet. The other way to look at it is this: single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, all into the same chain. And that's a second block. Now, since this is the first row, I'm not going to put my stitch marker on my first block yet because I can see it there pretty clearly. But going forward, the first block of the row always sits down a little lower than the other blocks, so it's helpful to put a stitch marker on the first block of the row just to keep track of it. Let's continue. We skip 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, find the 4th and work single crochet, chain 3, and 3 double crochet all into the same chain. Single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, all worked into the same chain, and that's it right there. And that's 3 blocks. That is what you're going to do all the way across. Skip 3 chains, find the 4th, single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, all worked into the same chain. Skip 3 chains, single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet into the next chain. That is the pattern all the way across. I'll catch up with you at the end and I will sing out all of the block numbers or the count of the blocks that you should have in your project thus far, depending on whether you're making the scarf or the cowl for kids or adults. I'll see you at the end of the row. We've been repeating that little pattern all the way across, so every 3 chains and into the 4th chain, single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet. So every 3 chains, you're skipping 3 chains, every 4th chain you're working a little block into it. We end the row with skip 3 chains and single crochet into the last chain. So we're not putting a block out the end, we're just ending the row with a single crochet. Every row ends with a single crochet. If you are making the scarf for children, you will have 7 blocks all the way across. You can just count those little points, but don't forget that the one on the end sits down a little lower. For adults, you will have 8 blocks all the way across. That's a scarf. For the cowl, if you're making it for a child, you'll have 19 blocks. For an adult, you'll have 23. And if you're making it a custom number, whether it's for the scarf or the cowl, the way you figure out the number of blocks you should have is you take your foundation chain, which was a multiple of 4, divide that number by 4, and then subtract 1. So for example, if you chained 40, you divide 40 by 4, you have 10, subtract 1, that's 9. You will have 9 blocks. And that's how you figure out the custom block number that you should have, whether you're making a scarf or a cowl. At the end of every row, after you've single crocheted to finish the row, chain 3, and turn into the same little single crochet that you finished the last row with, and right where you chained 3, you're going to work 3 double crochet all into that same stitch right at the foot of that chain 3. And I invite you to get your stitch markers out and just stick that stitch marker on the end of that block. This is the first block of the row, but once we work the second and third blocks, you'll see what I mean when I say that the first block of the row sits down a little lower than the rest of the blocks do. From here on out, every single row is exactly the same. You chain 3, turn, and work 3 double crochet into the same stitch as the chain 3. put your stitch marker on that block. Then you reach to the next block, so you're always looking for a block. They're easily identifiable because on a lean, their little point sits up. You're looking for the space between the chain 3 and the next stitch. Slip your hook right into that space between those stitches. Single crochet, chain 3, and around that chain 3 into that space, 3 more double crochet. So the block is the same, single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet. It's just where you're putting it that's a little bit different from the foundation row. Single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, all into that space between the chain 3 and the double crochet of each block all the way across. And now you can see that the first stitch or the first block of the row sits a lot lower than the next one does. Let's do the third block. Skip to the next block, find the space, into that space work single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet. Easy peasy, you don't even have to look for a stitch, you're just looking for that space. You can feel your way across, and that's the third block of the row. And whichever direction you're crocheting in, so if you're right-handed, you're working right to left, that row's blocks will always lean in the direction that you're working in. If you're left-handed, you're working left to right, your blocks will be going in the other direction. And because we turn at the end of every row's blocks first lean one way, and then the other, and then the other, and the other. So when you're counting, you want to count on a zigzag. So row 1 leans this way, row 2 leans that way. Row 3, row 4, row 5, row 6, etc. Keep a stitch marker on that first block because it sits so low that you might forget to count it when you get all the way across to the end. And you will have the same number of blocks in every row going forward. So if it's a scarf for a child, it will always be 7 blocks across. If it's a scarf for an adult, it'll always be 8 blocks across or whatever your custom number is. If you're making the cowl, like me, for a child, it'll always be 19 blocks. For an adult, 23 blocks. And if it's a custom number, it'll always be the same number. You always work a single crochet, chain 3, and 3 double crochet into the space between the chain 3 and the double crochet of each block all the way across. The other way to think of it is that you're looking for the little point, the peak of that previous row's block, and into that little space that's created, you're working the new block. Those blocks will all lean in the same direction depending on the direction you're crocheting in. Every row will have the same number of blocks. We'll count them up when we get to the end. Like I say, keep a stitch marker on the first block of the row. You can move it every row just so you know where the first block of the row is. It helps to keep things quick and counting as you work. I'll see you at the end of row 2. Once you've worked that little repeating leaning block pattern all the way across, the last thing you do is find the last block of the previous row, find the little chain space, and single crochet into it. Again, you don't work another block off the edge. You just end the row with a single crochet, and that's it. So your last block ends with a single crochet in the block from the row before, and every row kind of has like a little bit of a slant to it. Count them up. Remember that your first block is this one over here that's marked with a stitch marker, and it sits below the rest of them, which looks like the back of an alligator or a dinosaur maybe. You should have exactly the same number of blocks in this row as you did in your previous row, and every row from here on out is exactly the same. We chain 3, turn our work 3 double crochet into the same single crochet that ended the previous row. That's the first block of the row, so I like to pause, grab my stitch marker, and mark it so that I know where it is and I don't forget to count it when I get across. Jump to the point. I'm looking for the point of the next block. Slip hook between chain 3 and double crochet into the space. Single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, all into that space. And you just keep repeating that again and again and again, all the way across. Find the point, slip your hook into the space, single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, and we continue. When you get all the way across to the end, your last block is worked into the point of the second last block of the row, right here, And you end the block or end the row with a single crochet in the last, underneath the point of the last block. Count them up. You should always continue to have the same number of blocks per row. And you can work this pattern on repeat, back and forth, for the following numbers of rows. If you're making a scarf for a child, I recommend 84 rows. If you're making the scarf for an adult, I recommend 105 rows. Now, 84 rows will be a roughly 48-inch long scarf for a child. 105 rows will be a roughly 60-inch scarf for an adult, but you can make it longer or shorter depending on your needs. That's for the scarf. For the cowl, if you're making it for a child, I recommend 17 rows. And for an adult, 20 rows. Again, this is the depth of the cowl, so you can make as many or as few rows as you want, but a cowl should be nice and deep. It should want to puddle a little bit under the chin, so at least 17 rows for a child, at least 20 rows for an adult. I'll let you work away at that, and I'll catch up with you at the end of row 20 in the cowl. I have now completed 20 rows in my cowl, and I'm ready to seam it up. 17 rows for a child's cowl, 20 rows for an adult cowl, or if you want it deeper, you just keep repeating row 2 until it's as deep as you like. Remember, we are going to be bringing these two short edges together and seaming them shut to make it into a bit of a stovepipe. If you're making the scarf, you are still probably working away on it. 84 rows or so for children, 105 rows for adults. Of course, yours is going to be much narrower, but you can continue to repeat row 2 back and forth until the scarf is as long as you like. Once you've reached the last row for the scarf, you're going to fasten off and weave in your tails. Then you can just sort of pause for a moment because we will all be doing a finishing row, but for us making the cowls, we want to fasten off at the end of our last row and leave a long tail. So if you're doing a scarf, no leaving a long tail required. If you're doing the cowl, because we're doing some sewing, you want to leave a long tail. And by long, I say 60 centimeters, maybe 24 inches. Fasten off. Take a moment to take your two short ends from the bottom and the top and just pull them slightly, just to get them to sort of flatten out, stretch a little bit. There's my stitch marker on the end of the first block of the row. Stretch them out a little bit. That way you have a nice straight seam. And when you bring your two short ends together, because we're going to use the ladder stitch, the magic of the ladder stitch, to sew these two little ends together, it's easier to kind of see where they line up if you give them a little bit of a stretch, just to make sure that they're both even. Again, if you're making the scarf, you don't have to do any of this because your scarf is just one long strip. For those of us making the cowl, this is how we're going to seam it up. We're going to use the ladder stitch. You're going to pair up your two short ends, make sure that your long tail is threaded up in your yarn needle. We're going to start up here at the top where the yarn is still attached. And the ladder stitch is basically just creating rungs of yarn or thread between the two halves of the piece that you're trying to sew together, and then cinching it shut every so many stitches. So here we go. We're going to start on the side where our yarn is. I'm going to run my needle underneath a loop or down underneath a loop and back out through another little stitch on this side. Because the edges are what I call kind of raw edges of crochet, you don't have actual stitches to work with, you've just got sort of the edges of stitches. So you're just going to look for loops, run your needle underneath a loop, first on one side, and then you're going to hop over to the other side and run your needle through a couple of loops. You sort of see what I'm doing. I'm running it through, like this was probably a chain 3, so I'm running it first through one chain and then through the chain beneath it. It doesn't have to be super exacting like that. What you're doing is creating a rung, and then you hop back to the other side. I like to try and go back through the same place that the yarn came out of. So you see that's where the yarn came out of. I'm going to go back down through there, and I'm going to just bring my needle out down here. There, that looks good. And I'm not pulling too tight yet because I want to see the rungs for the first few stitches. There we go. Then I hop back to the other side. I see that my needle came out here the last time, so I'm going to poke my needle back down there. I'm careful not to split my yarn. And then I'm going to bring my needle out through a little loop just below that. And just slowly creating these little rungs. And once you've got around 3 or 4, especially when you're just getting started, pull gently but firmly, and you will cinch your little edge shut. Don't worry about the top here. The top is a bit uneven, but that's perfectly all right. Pause, make sure your edges are still more or less evenly aligned, and continue. Hop over here, try to find the last place your needle came out, go back down through the same spot, bring your needle out in another place, hop back over here. You're always keeping your little stitches on either side of your fabric relatively close together. So down through one stitch, out through another just below it, on the same side. And every few stitches, hold the end and pull tightly. And your little rungs will disappear, and your edge will start to mesh together very nicely. It's an uneven raw edge, and this is a lovely way to get it seamed up. So let's do, go through here. Keep your stitches relatively close together. Take your time. And every few rungs of the ladder, just pause and pull tightly. And you'll have a next to invisible seam once you're all the way down to the bottom of your cowl. Once you get down to the bottom, you can just sort of do one last little overlap stitch between the two edges. And if you want to, and you've got your little tail there, you can tie those two ends together. I love to do that if my two ends match up. It just feels a little more secure. Then you can fasten off or snip your yarn and weave those two tails in. You're at the bottom now, and for those of us doing the cowl and the scarf, we're going to put a little finishing row on at the bottom. The finishing row is the same for all of us, whether you're making a scarf or a cowl. We're going to take our yarn, put a slip knot on our hook. We're looking at the bottom edge, so this is the foundation chain row of our piece, whether it's the cowl or the scarf. If it's the cowl, you're going to pick it up, find your seam, insert your hook in the foundation chain right next to your seam. If it's a scarf, you're just going to start on the far right if you're right-handed, left if you're left-handed. You're going to put your hook into the edge foundation chain. We're all going to join with a single crochet. And it's that very familiar pattern. We're going to chain 3 and work 3 double crochet into the same place that we joined our yarn. So underneath that single crochet that we just joined. And then you're looking across the bottom for the areas where your original little leaning shells are anchored. It's pretty easy to see. If you pull up, you're skipping 1, 2, 3, and there's going to be a fairly large space where that shell was originally anchored. That's where you're going to put your single crochet, chain 3, and 3 double crochet right into the bottom of the leaning shell from row 1. So it's not too difficult. You don't really have to count your chains. You're just looking, you hold it up, you see that leaning shell, look for where it's all anchored, and you're putting your hook right in there and continuing the pattern. Single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, all into the same place. And you're going to build that leaning shell stitch all the way across the bottom, and it will be leaning in the opposite direction of your first row. So it looks continuous. Skip 3 chains or pull up on that, find your next block, it's anchored there, slip your hook in, single crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet, all into the exact same anchor chain. And you're going to do that all the way across. So if you're working on a scarf, you're just going to work naturally to the very edge. You'll single crochet in the last chain. If you're working on the cowl, you're just working all the way around, just a longer edge. And we're going to end the same way over here in that last chain right next to the seam. But I'll catch up with you there. Once you've worked that pattern all the way across the bottom of your scarf or cowl, again, if you're working on a scarf for a child, you'll have 7 blocks across, 8 blocks for an adult or a custom number. For our cowl, you'll have 19 blocks across for a child, 23 blocks across for an adult or a custom number. Your last stitch is in the last chain at the very end of the row, and it doesn't matter whether it's the seam you're looking at for the cowl or just the end of your piece. If you're looking at the scarf, you're just going to single crochet in that last chain to finish, and that's it. If you want, those of us making the cowl, you can put in an extra little chain just to sort of feel like that seam has one added connector at the very bottom, and then you can fasten off. Grab your scissors, snip a tail, and weave in all your tails. Make sure everything is in nice and neat and tidy. And now you've got a top of your scarf or cowl that matches the bottom. There is nothing quite like a new cozy cowl or a striking new scarf to prepare yourself for the cool wintry weather that's coming. We hope you enjoyed making today's pumpkin spice cowl or the pumpkin spice scarf, and if you missed the matching hat, we'll make sure there's a link to that tutorial in the description box down below. Be sure to check out lionbrand.com to find your perfect pound of love color. And a big thank you again to Lion Brand for sponsoring today's show. And if you'd like to help support us here at the Jayda InStitches show, then please feel free to pop over to our Etsy shop and pick up a written pattern for today's project as well. It is definitely getting blustery out there, so I'm going to take my hat and take my cowl and get out there and go for a stroll and enjoy all those beautiful spiraling leaves before they've all spiraled away. Have a wonderful weekend, stay safe, stay crafty, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye!
Hi everyone, this is Mama in Stitches. Thank you for watching. Here are a few other videos you might enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can also click the like button and the bell. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.